All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yes, indeed.
So today, we're taking a look at a phrase that's so deeply ingrained in our culture. I mean, really, who hasn't heard it?
No.
You're fired.
Yeah,
Right. It's almost like you can hear it in a particular voice.
absolutely.
But what happens when a federal judge essentially steps in and says, nope, not so fast?
That's a fascinating twist, isn't it? And really speaks to, the listener about the power dynamics at play.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to be digging into today. Thousands of federal workers told, you're fired. And then a judge steps in and says, not so fast. We're talking about a ruling that has huge implications for how our government operates.
Yeah, and think about it from the perspective of someone who works for the government. You're there, you're serving the public, and suddenly you're caught up in this massive legal battle.
Exactly. We're talking about fundamental questions of fairness, accountability, the whole shebang.
Yeah.
And to help us break it all down, we're turning to Glenn Kirshner's analysis of some really interesting reporting for the New York Times.
And as we go through this, think about the broader context here. This isn't just about individual jobs. It's about the systems in place to protect those who work for the government.
Right. So let's start with where this story really blew up, the New York Times. And their headline was pretty blunt. Trump administration must rehire thousands of fired workers, judge rules.
That's about as straightforward as it gets.
Right to the point. And this decision came from Judge William Alsop over at the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California.
So we're talking about a significant legal player here, not just some small claims court.
Right. And think about the scale here. We're not talking about a handful of people. This is thousands of workers across multiple federal agencies.
Yeah, that's a lot of people's lives disrupted, a lot of families potentially impacted. And just to give you an idea of the scope, we're talking about 6 agencies, specifically the Treasury, Veterans Affairs, Agriculture, Defense, Energy, and Interior.
Wow, that's a pretty significant chunk of the federal government.
Right. And it's important to note these weren't just any federal employees. They were all on probationary status, which means they were still in that initial period of employment where things can be a bit more uncertain.
Right. And what Glenn Kirshner points out, which is really interesting, is that this ruling from Judge Alsop actually went further than a previous one. It's like he saw something here that really pushed him to take a stronger stance.
That makes you wonder what changed, what new evidence or argument really tipped the scales for him.
Yeah. So let's get into the nitty-gritty here. What did Judge Alsop actually say and why?
Well, the core of his ruling, and this is where things get really interesting, is that these firings were essentially done unlawfully by fiat from the Office of Personnel Management.
Okay, hold on. By fiat from the Office of Personnel Management. What does that even mean?
So basically, he's saying that the decision to fire all these people came down from on high, from the OPM, which is like the HR department for the entire federal government.
Okay, so instead of each agency making their own decisions about who to let go, it sounded like the OPM just swooped in and said, you're all fired.
That's the gist of it. And the legal problem here is that the OPM doesn't really have that kind of power. It's the individual agencies that are supposed to have the authority to hire and fire their own people.
So it sounds like Judge Alsop is saying that the Trump administration really overstepped its bounds here.
Exactly. They tried to centralize these firings through the OPM, and Judge Alsop said, nope, not how it works.
And he didn't mince words about it either. Kirshner quotes him saying, "It is a sad day when our government would fire some good employees and say it was based on performance when they know good and well that's a lie."
Wow, that's a pretty strong statement coming from a federal judge.
Right. It's not every day you hear a judge basically accusing the government of lying.
And he didn't stop there. He actually called the performance-based justification a sham, which implies that they were trying to get around the rules for firing federal employees.
So it's like they were trying to find a loophole to get rid of these people without following the proper procedures.
That's what it looks like, and that brings us to another concerning aspect of this whole thing, the government's lack of cooperation with the judge's inquiries.
Oh, yeah. What happened there?
Well, Judge Alsop wanted to hear directly from some of the Trump administration officials involved, to get their side of the story and to understand how these mass layoffs went down.
Makes sense. So who did he want to talk to?
One of the key people was Charles Eisel. He was the acting head of the OPM at the time.
Ah, so the guy right in the thick of it.
Exactly, but guess what? He didn't show up.
Seriously, they just said, nope, he's not coming.
Pretty much the government told the court the day before that Eisel wouldn't be there. No detailed explanation given.
And I bet Judge Alsop was not happy about that.
You can say that again. Kirshner quotes him saying to a Justice Department lawyer, "You will not bring the people in here to be cross-examined. You're afraid to do so because you know cross-examination would reveal the truth." Oh, wow. He's basically saying they're hiding something.
Right. It's like if you've got nothing to hide, why not let your people testify?
Exactly. And this whole lack of cooperation really seemed to bother. Judge Alsop, he even said, "It upsets me, and I want you to know that."
Yeah, you can hear the frustration in his voice. It's like he's saying, I'm trying to get to the bottom of this and you're not helping.
And he didn't just stop at frustration. He went on to accuse the government of giving him press releases sham documents instead of actual information.
Ouch, that's a serious accusation.
Yeah.
He's basically saying they were trying to mislead him.
So we've got potentially unlawful firings, a lack of cooperation, and accusations of misleading the court. And where does this all leave us?
Well, it raises some really big questions about how our government is supposed to work.
Right, so let's zoom out a bit for the listener. What are the big takeaways here? What does Glenn Kirshner say about all of this?
Well, for Kirshner, this whole situation really boils down to the wrongful termination of thousands of people and the government trying to cover it up, right? And it's not just about these specific individuals. It's about the principle of it,
Yeah.
What kind of message does this send to people who work for the government? Exactly. It raises questions about fairness, due process accountability, all that good stuff.
And Kirshner sees federal judges like Alsop as really important figures in all of this. He calls them beacons of light and of truth and of accountability.
It's like they're the ones who are supposed to step in and say, hold on a second, something's not right here.
And for you, the listener, think about it this way. This ruling shows just how important an independent judiciary is. We need judges who aren't afraid to stand up at the executive branch and say, you can't do that.
Right. And it also highlights the importance of those checks and balances that are built into our system. The idea that no one branch of government has too much power.
Absolutely. And, this case is also really interesting because it gives you a glimpse into the inner workings of government and how these kinds of disputes play out. Yeah, and it raises some important questions about the rights of federal employees, especially those who are still on probationary status.
Right. So to recap, a federal judge has ruled that the Trump administration broke the law when they fired all those workers. And it looks like